enjoying the music with me too. Like, so everybody, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Real. I'm your host, Ysmaine, and here with me is Carlos. Hi, Carlos.
Hey, Nini.
Hey. So very excited about this episode because it is definitely a polemic, topic right now. So I feel like there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainties, a lot of media, articles, news. So I just want to try to shine a light here, and Carlos is going to help me kind of navigate some of the consumers' questions that we've been having coming through, and hopefully we get through it. And
Yeah, absolutely. So normally, Nini kind of, does the whole MCing initially and stuff, but since she's the one that's gonna be talking more on this one, since she has more expertise, I'm just gonna provide a few questions that I've been asked on social media regarding the matter, and then we'll let Nini take it away.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. So let's just start with what is the NAR agreement? Let's start there.
Yeah. What is this NAR settlement situation, right?
Yeah.
So basically how it started is that, of course, attorneys are trying to make money. That's how it started. It did not actually start with a consumer. It started with attorneys.
Isn't that how it always starts, with attorneys making money?
So attorneys got with some of the seller consumers. So the initial settlement started with sellers basically having a complaint that commissions were being standardized and they were being obligated to pay for not just a listing agent, but also a buyer's agent commission. And which it happens, like the seller normally pays for both commissions, but basically the settlement was based upon the fact that they were feeling like they were forced and they didn't have any other options. So that's what started this whole NAR settlement. And I feel like in a way it needed to happen because I feel like there's a lot of people just kind of like accepting, hey, historically, this is what happened, so this is what's going to be. And took away a little bit of this kind of like, negotiation and liberty of the consumer. So in that sense, I agree. But honestly, it is not favoring the consumer, and it's actually creating a lot of chaos in the industry as a whole. Nothing really has changed from the settlement, and that's what we're going to get into detail. But
I don't think so. Yeah, I see a lot of the same thing. I mean, now it's just worded differently, if you ask me. But
exactly.
I'm seeing a lot of sellers still, paying
The buyer's
commission.
agency commission. And I'll explain why that happens and why historically it has been the case and why I feel it should still remain the same. And we will explain what the benefits are for the seller to do so. But yeah, so basically to just stop it, like what is the NAR settlement, why it started, that's what it was. Basically, attorneys got together with some sellers that at the time complained that their agent at the time may kind of put them in a position where they didn't have an option and they have to pay for it and they were forced. And they also complained there was a standardized commission structure where they didn't have, any wiggle room, basically. So that's what started. And it could have been, that specifically agent at the time, didn't word things correctly, didn't, present things correctly. But this is kind of standardizing the whole industry, and that's what I don't agree, because not all agents do that. And
everybody has to pay for one. Right. Everybody has to pay for one bad actor.
Exactly. So that's really what the source of it is, basically.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question. As a real estate broker owner, you deal with all sorts of educated and non-educated people in the industry, to say it politely,
Yes, exactly. That's true, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see it? Because I saw it a lot on my contracts where the seller's agent was getting 6% from the seller, but wasn't necessarily splitting it evenly.
Correct.
So is that normal? Like, is that okay? I mean,
So
legally, okay. I know ethically, if I'm not doing
so
it,
that's going to bring me to another thing that we might even answer another question. What has changed since the settlement, right? So yes,
okay.
before the settlement, how it used to be is that the listing agreement that a seller would sign together with a listing agent basically stated, okay, this is the commission that that agent in particular is negotiating with the seller. So let's not put numbers in there. Let's say it's X, right? So that seller agreed to pay the listing agent X percent. And then in that agreement back before settlement, you would state that that listing agent was willing to share X to a potential buyer's agent. So basically they would be charging a higher percentage to ensure they had enough to pay out to a buyer's agent coming in, a buyer coming with a buyer's agent. So the listing agent was in control as per what the split of, this commission total was. So
Got
the
it.
listing agent
Got
was
it.
in charge in that sense because, okay, hey, I'm making X amount, and from this X amount, I'm giving half to the buyer's agent, or no, I'm only giving 0.75 to the buyer's agent. So they had
Okay.
that. And before settlement, this amount that they agreed to share, because it is in the contract, would be disclosed in the MLS, which is the multi-listing service. Multi-listing page where we put all the listings, the houses for sale. So it'll be like publicly disclosed, and any buyer's agent coming in with a buyer would see, okay, this house is offering X amount towards buyer agency compensation. So that's how it used to be. And because of the settlement and the fact that they were saying, okay, you're obligating the buyer to pay for commission, and there's cooperating compensation, that's the biggest thing that the settlement also kind of tackled, was the fact that by forcing the seller, that listing agent was basically forcing a certain amount towards the buyer's agent. And then in turn, a buyer's agent that is not doing things for the right reasons, right, could say, hey, buyer, this house is better than this house, but really the reason they were saying that is because, this house is paying more commission to myself. So
got it. Okay.
so there was a little bit
Okay.
of that in the back end, and that's what this
That
settlement
makes
also
sense.
tackled. It does make sense. Again, there's people and there's people, right? It is nice to know what's being offered. It was so much easier because then you can already take that into account and whatnot. But you should not determine your client's decision based on how much you're getting, right? That should
Yeah.
never be the case. And I feel like that was happening, right? I'm not going to generalize
I totally
because
get it now.
yeah, exactly. So there was two ends to that. So basically, this listing agent forcing a seller to pay already ahead of time a certain amount towards buyer agency compensation, and on the other end of the story, it would be the buyer's agent kind of steering a buyer towards a property because that property paid more commission. So there was two
Got
issues
it.
happening before the settlement came into fruition.
So let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
Going off topic a little bit now that I understand better the whole situation.
Yeah.
So does it still happen where the buyer's agent only has to share X amount of the commission, or does it have to be split down the middle after agreement?
So after the settlement now, the listing agent is only putting in their agreement, or should be anyway, putting on their agreement. And I say should be because it's not really finalized. So let me back up a step.
Okay.
From the settlement, what has been officialized and is ultimately now mandatory is that in the MLS, the buyer's agent compensation is no longer being disclosed. So me as a buyer agent representing a buyer, I'll see a house. I will not know if the seller is offering compensation, if any. Like, I don't know. I'll show the house based on my client liking that property and wanting to see it. And then when we make an offer, we're going to negotiate my compensation with my client's offer based on the offer itself. I will not know what that agent's offering and if there's any cooperating compensation. Now, on the cooperating piece, some listing agents are still using cooperating compensation, meaning they're still charging their seller more in order to pay the buyer's agent.
Okay, got it. So in that sense, that didn't necessarily change. What
That
did
didn't change.
change is the fact that the buyer can't push the buyer's agent can't push a buyer into a house just because of a higher commission structure
Correct.
on that property.
Exactly. They don't have the ability anymore. Now, one thing to just clarify too, some brokers like my own, we are completely staying away of cooperating compensation because the whole NAR settlement from NAR basically started with this cooperating thing, right? So some brokers like my own are choosing to completely eliminate that. So if I'm negotiating a buyer agent compensation, I'm putting it in the offer as part of the offer. So this offer is going to be what I'm asking for myself and my client. Another offer is going to have the same thing, and so on and so forth. So I'm not caring per se what the seller has previously agreed upon with the listing agent, if they did any, right, on a cooperating compensation, because I'm not using that anymore. I'm staying completely away.
So what you're saying is when you submit an offer, you're asking for X amount on all transactions, no matter what. And then if the seller decides they're going to pay a buyer's agency
to do so, or they can counter, they have the flexibility, which that's the whole point of the settlement. Like I said, they were feeling forced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not doing that anymore. Because if you use the cooperating compensation, I'm sticking to that technically. They're still forced to pay whatever they sign with the listing agent. And then I'm relying on counting that listing agent properly disclosed that they had the choice or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not putting myself in that position of, oh, maybe they disclosed it correctly or not. I'm just going to completely remove myself from cooperating and then putting in the offer and letting the seller decide, are you okay paying for this portion that we are putting in with our offer? And if you are, great. That's what we're moving forward with as part of the offer. And we created a saying called the PITO, PITTO, put it in the offer. And that's what we're using moving forward. PITO is the new rule.
Yeah, I've seen contracts come in where it says the buyer's agent, the seller will pay X amount of the buyer's agent and the buyer will pay X amount because the seller's only willing to pay X amount.
Correct.
So you're right. It does give them the options. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. So we kind of know already what the changes are happening in the real estate industry based on the settlement. So it does not mean that real estate agents no longer get paid the same way. Just that the seller kind of decides. The seller at least has an option now as to how they want to compensate the agents.
Correct. And the compensation itself has always been done through settlement. And in Pennsylvania, we do settlements with title companies. So the title company disperses the funds. So in that sense, nothing changed. And if the seller is agreeing to make a certain compensation payment to the buyer's agent, it will show up on the settlement alta that we call also the closing disclosure as coming from the seller to the buyer's agent and seller's agent, unless there was something else agreed upon, like the buyer's paying a portion, so it will be coming out of the buyer portion and the seller's portion. So in that sense, nothing changed. It's just however it was determined based on the offer.
I remember pre-settlement and post-COVID that I would see contracts where it was so competitive that the buyer would pay the buyer's agent's commission and sometimes the buyer and seller's agent commission just to win the offer.
It was kind of getting crazy back then, yes, but it's true. Yeah, it is true.
Remember.
So it's all a negotiation. It's always being a negotiation, but I feel like the settlement just kind of shine a bright light into the fact that there was no wiggle room on the seller side, I feel, or they felt like they didn't have wiggle room, but there was always wiggle room. There was always a negotiation. When you are, as a seller, you're working with a listing agent, you were never obligated, oh, you have to pay this X amount and you have to pay the buyer. No, that's not it. Like, you're shopping for a listing agent. So most of the time, the sellers are interviewing 1, 2 to 3 listing agents. So nobody ever forced anything on a seller. It always came down to, they chose their best option, right? And they move forward with that. So nobody's forcing a hand on the seller. So that thing about like, oh, I didn't have options, that's not true, because you are agreeing, you're signing a contract agreeing to do that. But I feel like there was a lack of disclosure and communication from agents prior settlement. And I feel like right now, the agents are more educated and they know how to properly explain how the procedures are, and why a seller should pay for a buyer's agent compensation, and why that favors them in the sale of their home.
Okay. So, so one question that I get a lot is, will I now have to pay my buyer's agents out of pocket?
So yes, that's a very common one, because people are like, okay, so the sellers are no longer wanting to pay buyer's agent compensation because there's no operating compensation. So now the buyer has to pay for it. So the buyers always had to pay for it, technically. So prior settlement,
they put it on the price of the property. They just
and so prior settlement, how did it work? You as the buyer, you want to start looking for homes. You sign a buyer agency agreement with a buyer's agent. That buyer agency agreement will stipulate exactly what that buyer's agent is charging to represent you as your buyer's agent during your buying process. And you will have a fee there. That always has been the case. That never changed. And you as the buyer, you hiring the agent to represent you. So yes, you are entitled and liable to pay for that service. But before settlement, the buyer's agent already knew, okay, this house is offering to pay X amount. So the buyer doesn't have to pay for it because I already know this house is paying for it. Now it's just that we don't see it, but still, we are still negotiating with the seller to make sure that they are paying for the buyer's agent compensation on behalf of the buyer, because the buyers overall always have the most expenses when purchasing a home. And the sellers know that, and they always have known that. And they have to think that when they were buyers themselves, they also benefited from the fact that the sellers for their home before paid for their buyer's agent compensation. So it's like a revolving thing. You're paying as a seller, you're not paying as a buyer, because you already have so many expenses with the lending side, with transfer tax and recording.
And even buyers that are sellers, because they're either moving up or moving down. They're going through it because their seller is paying their commission, and they have to pay the commission for the person that they're selling to.
Okay,
essentially.
Exactly. So it balances out at the end. The only time that we will not balance it out is like, let's say you are in a competing situation and you want to stand out, you want to make your offer stand out, you have the funds, then you can offer, yes, I will pay for my agent's compensation because I want my offer to look stronger to the seller. So yes, that's a way for you to do that. But that doesn't mean you're not able to negotiate with the seller so they can recover your buyer's agent compensation. And another question that I had as a segue to this, do you see that going away, like the seller's not paying for it? Not yet. I have not noticed that at all. I can see that they are maybe negotiating more. They're not willing to pay as much, or sometimes they are, depending on the situation. So it's going to come down
too.
Yeah. So it's going to come down to maybe the buyer's agent negotiating with their buyer, maybe working the fees around their buyer's capabilities, right? So there's a lot of working between, is a team, like me with a buyer, I'm a team with them. I'm not going to put them in a situation where they cannot afford to buy because now that seller doesn't want to pay and they cannot afford me. Like, we're going to work something out that makes sense. But I don't work for free, and I hope everybody knows that, right? So we're putting a lot of effort driving around, helping with paperwork, and so much more behind the scenes that the buyers don't even realize. So we're talking on average 97 hours, just so you know, of work on the buying side.
Wow.
That's the average actual, which I track my hours, average actual time for a standard buyer that sees between 6 to 10 houses. If the buyer starts looking for 10, 20 houses, those hours are going to be way beyond that, driving time, depending what their radius is too and whatnot. But so people don't realize how much time is put into it. So yes, we're not going to work for free, but we're definitely going to work with our clients to make sense financially for them. And we're never going to put ourselves in the way of them getting a home.
And that leads me into my next question, which I think is very, very important to address. And it is, can I still get buyers representation, or do I have to go directly to the listing agent?
That's a great question. And my answer to this question is yes, you can definitely go directly to the listing agent, but you should not. And the reason for that, not that, I can be a seller agent, I can be a buyer agent. So it's removing myself as an agent. It's not about making money here. It's about you as a consumer being properly represented. So if I'm representing a seller, I have a contract to represent the best interests of that seller. If you as a consumer come to me and I'm working with the seller and you say, I would like to buy this house, can you help me? I can help you, but guess what? I'm still gonna make money from the buying side. So the seller is still having to pay additional because no agent's gonna work both sides for free. And you as the consumer, the buyer coming into this relationship now, you're not gonna be properly represented because my contract precedes your representation with the seller, right? So I need to look out for the seller's best interest first, always, no matter what. So automatically, you as the buyer is going to be at disadvantage because I have to watch out for the best interest of the seller, not the buyer. So it is to the buyer's best interest to have representation, always. And you don't have to pay for that representation because a good agent is going to negotiate their commission into the offer and represent you the best way they can and look out for your best interests on that negotiation piece.
And you just walked into my next question.
Oh, really? What is that?
How will this affect first-time home buyers who may not have extra cash for agent fees?
Yeah. So first of all, if you don't have enough funds, you don't have representation, you're going to miss out on so many potential opportunities to not only qualify for grants that agent might be able to connect you with, or, better loan officers that they have connections with, because a lot of my buyers, when they come to me, they're getting those online approvals or pre-qualifications, I should say, that are worth nothing and don't have a good understanding of their costs and how much they're actually paying for that lender, so famous online. I'm not going to mention names. But yes, they come to me completely unaware of anything. So right there and then you see how much value an agent can have from the very beginning. And then on top of that, negotiation. Like, we play a big role on providing that potential consumer buyer the best terms for them. They're not going to understand what contingencies and conditions should be in their contract to protect them. And the seller's agent's not going to worry about putting them there because technically they don't want conditions. They want the best terms for their seller.
They want the easiest deal possible.
Exactly. So again, that consumer buyer coming in unrepresented is going to struggle and is going to automatically be, losing because the lack of representation. So the cost to have an agent, it's technically zero if you have a good agent willing to negotiate their, commission into the offer. You as the buyer, yes, you are liable to pay for your represented agent, but that commission does not have to come out of pocket. Just understand that. You are signing a contract with your buyer's agent. That has always been the case and is still the case post-settlement. That is never going to change. You need to have an agreement with your agent. And you need to sign an agreement to see homes as well. A lot of people don't understand that. Me as a licensed agent, I'm not supposed to be out there opening houses, to show homes to people if they're not my clients. So that's a big change. I mean, it's always been the case, but after settlement, they're really tackling on agents. We have to have an agreement signed or we stand to, jeopardize our license. So we have to have that agreement and represent that buyer. And then that buyer will be able to benefit from proper representation, best negotiation, and don't necessarily have to worry about making the payment for that representation because we still can negotiate into the offer.
Okay. Now, here's another question I'm getting a lot. From a seller standpoint, will this affect how quick their property sells because they're not posting how much commission they're willing to pay?
So, good question. I wouldn't say it would impact how quickly they can sell their home, but if they are unwilling to pay a buyer's agent compensation, it will definitely reduce the pool of buyers available to them, which in turn is going to, slow down their sale. So that brings me to like, why should a seller still be willing to pay for compensation? That's the main reason. Like, majority of the buyers are very aware nowadays. They're very educated. There's a lot of information online. They know they need to have representation. So a seller that is not willing to work with buyers agents out there automatically is losing about 80% of buyers that are actually qualified and ready to go to purchase a home. So a seller that's like, oh, I don't want to pay for any commissions, and they're going for sale by owner, for example. I just saw this statistics actually. The amount of sales coming out of for sale by owners, so properties sold by the sellers without any representation on either side, they have reduced to only 5% as of 2024. 5% of all the sales, only 5% actually sell for sale by owner. Everything else is listed as for sale by owner, and then they end up listing with an agent, and they do work with agent on the buying side. Similar percentage goes to listing properties listed with an agent that are not willing to pay for buyer's agent compensation. We're seeing less than 9% of sales going, out without the seller paying for the buyer's agent compensation. So it's very,
like you said, it lowers their pool of how quick their house is going to sell, because let's be honest, most first-time home buyers don't have all the money. You know what I mean? Like, they have just enough, to qualify for the property, and then if they have to throw, I'm not going to give a number, but a significant amount compared to what they have, for buyer's agent's commission, it's going to take them out of that qualification, and now they have to, come lower on the price points.
Yes.
So I guess
a seller that it doesn't have enough equity, like you're saying, right? There's the right time to sell, and when a seller is really tight on that budget, yes, if you are not able to pay for commission, maybe because you just don't have the funds to pay for it, like you don't have the equity for it. And of course, no seller wants to sell a house and pay to sell, right? So, and I don't think me as a listing agent would ever recommend that to a sellers. I would say, can you wait? Is this really the right time? Let's wait another 6 months until you build more equity or whatever it be. But if they decide, look, I have enough to pay for a listing agent and I want to list for sale, but I don't have enough to pay for a buyer's agent, we can still do that. And we have to disclose the fact that there's going to be no concessions. That's what we call it, concessions. There will be no concessions. But yes, the timing in the market is definitely be longer, because the pool of buyers, like I said, is literally 90% less. Because only 9% only sold without buyer's agent compensation as of last year. So literally 91% of the pool of buyers gone. You're going to wait for that 9%, and maybe you get lucky that you find that one buyer that has funds and is paying for their buyer's agent compensation. They're okay with that. But guess what? They're probably going to get a good deal, because they're probably going to they're going to negotiate price down on you. Because they know you're limited. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And then my last question is, could this settlement impact home prices in the future? Do you see that happening?
I have a feeling yes, because since the NAR settlement happened, and with the changes within the MLS, when we close a property, like a property sold officially, in the MLS, we're required to put in, like, were there any concessions towards closing costs? And was there any concessions towards assistance from the seller? And it's split up in a way that concessions towards closing costs are basically what we would call our buyer's agent compensation, right? So when they're looking at this metrics, maybe a year from today, 2 years from today, I can tell you that, this property paid this much in assistance, so really they were netting this much. So this is what it really sold for. So that could definitely impact, but that has always been kind of tracked from previous, because before we already had it disclosed. They are paying, whatever percentage towards buyer's agent compensation. So that has always been to account.
I have seen it on appraisals. I have seen it on appraisals where it does impact, where it has to be noted if it had
Assistance.
seller assistance or not. Yeah, I have seen that.
Exactly. So it will definitely take a part into the pricing of a home and determining new prices for years to come. Do I see
Hmm.
that impacting in a way that's going to decrease value? No. It's just that we're going to have different metrics available to see, okay, when we're comparing two homes, oh, this one sold for, I don't know, 300, but no concessions. This one sold for 300, but they pay 15,000 in concessions. So, like we're gonna see, okay, so technically 285, 300, that's gonna be kind of how we're gonna be looking at those sales in the future.
But then potentially you'll also see that the 300 was on the market for 60 to 90 days, and the one with a little bit of concession
Sold in 2
flew
days.
off in 30 days. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we're gonna be able to present to a seller and say, look, if you want to list at this price range and not offer anything, that's the time frame you can expect. And then if you list at this and you are willing to offer this, then yes, this is the time frame you can expect, and they can kind of go from there or find some happy median. So it's just going to give us some more clarity, I think, and it will be helpful. But I don't see impacting value, because ultimately the house still has to appraise at what is in the contract, no matter what the concessions are.
Right. And
So in that
and
sense,
more transparency. I think more transparency, which is what the sellers and buyers wanted.
exactly.
And more education. It's gonna force the bad actors out, and the good realtors. They're gonna educate their clients. Like Nini and her team. On why it's best to pay, and the buyer's agency agreement, or if you need to give sellers assist or something to that extent to
Exactly.
move the property quicker.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Education is everything, and transparency and clear communication from the beginning. I think that's exactly what the NAR settlement really wanted to highlight. And in that sense, I do like the fact that it happened, because I think like our industry was lacking a little bit of more clarity and education in that sense. And
Mhm.
now I feel like we are forced to have that clarity and, education. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nini, for
Thank
all
you.
your insights. I understood the NAR settlement a lot better now
I know,
myself.
right?
So
So it's
yeah,
not that beast of seven heads like people think. It's
yeah, I thought it was. I was like,
simple
oh my
matter.
God, but yeah, it's like I think we should change this headline and put NAR settlement for dummies. No offense.
Down 101. I know, yes. Yeah, it is. It honestly is not a big deal. It is affecting the industry in a very big deal, because there's a lot of money involved. But again, it's really because of attorneys, money hungry,
Those darn attorneys.
and the whole freaking settlement. The sellers that were actually involved in the beginning and throughout, because there's like multiple versions of the settlement that came afterwards. They're getting about 20, I think it was $28 out of the settlement each,
Wow.
while the attorneys are making buku bucks, and I mean a lot. And there was like I said, different versions, because there's a settlement that started, there's another one, and there's one, it's like there's multiple branches out of the main settlement. So there's so
Like a
much
Medusa with
involved.
all the heads.
Yeah, like so a lot of money, but not necessarily for the consumer, unfortunately. But yes,
That
I feel like
never
the
is
clarity,
there.
they get their money's worth. Maybe I should have kept my attorney's license from Brazil here in the States as well. We'd be participating in some of these benefits there. I don't think I would ever take part of that. I think it's just crazy. I think it's
Yeah.
So that's really it. Did you have any other questions from the consumer?
Let me go through my list, because I think you pretty much hit a lot of them that I didn't even ask. So I'm like, all right, I guess this one's out of the way.
Yeah. They kind of tie in together sometimes.
Yeah, you walk into the other one. I'm like, all right, I'm not asking that anymore. I see. No. So, are there new agreements post settlement that need to be signed? I know you mentioned the one about the buyer's agency where you can't show a house without that, you're not allowed to be showing the houses. But is there anything else specific that needs to be
So
signed,
there was
at least in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania, PAR has been amazing. So the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors, about keeping up with the NAR settlement and making sure we're staying compliant, since we are a state that don't create our own, agreements. It's all based on the state. So in that sense, it was great. There's not necessarily new uh, agreements, but they modified existing agreements, because we were already pretty good state as far as having the proper agreements in place. So the
Mhm.
listing agreement got modified, where there's no such a thing as the cooperating piece. There's a section that if the seller is willing to share what the cooperating compensation could be, they can, but they don't have to. So that's how they modified it. The buyer's agency agreement really didn't change much, other than having a summary of, hey, this is why you're signing this. This is what the buyer's agent is going to do for you. Look out for your best interest, confidentiality, all that. So it's more like a description. But we always had to have a buyer's agency in order to work with a buyer. It's just that the state of Pennsylvania, and especially local associations, they're more strict now in regards of, hey, in order to open a door, you should definitely have a signed agreement. Otherwise, it can jeopardize your license. But the agreement itself has always been in place. You cannot work for a buyer without having buyer representation agreement signed. So some of the forms got tweaked. The CBC, which is our corporate broker agreement form, that's the one my brokerage in particular completely does not use anymore, but some brokerages are still using, where they say, hey, the seller is willing to pay X amount. They sign a cooperating compensation agreement, and they can share that with potential buyers agents via email and everything. The only thing that cannot be done is disclosed in the MLS. So as soon as it's done via email, everything is good. But depends on your rules and regulations of your brokerage. With my brokerage, we are just staying away from CBC. So yeah,
Okay,
agreements
and then
remain the same.
all right, and then finally, what are like the most important things or key takeaways that buyers and sellers need to know about the changes?
So for buyers and sellers, nothing changed. Like, life continues as it goes. It shouldn't be a change for buyers and sellers. What changed really is the legality and how things are being managed on the back end with the agents, right? So we are not seeing disclosure of compensation in the MLS, but you guys never saw it anyway as consumers. So it didn't matter, and it shouldn't matter, again, because we shouldn't be steering buyers towards a home because of compensation, right? So it should never have mattered. But now we don't see it. So buyers can have that peace of mind that, hey, they're suggesting this home because really they think this is the best home for me. Should have always been the case, but that's for sure now across the board. And then, so buyers always had to sign the agreement. So again, that doesn't change. Buyers always had to technically pay for their buyer's agent, but now we are just making them more clear and putting it in the offer, instead of like saying, hey, for sure the seller's paying for it. We cannot just say for sure, because we don't know for sure. We don't have the visibility. So we can say, look, for sure it's going to be in your offer for the seller to pay, whether they accept or not. That's going to be a negotiation piece, right?
Got it.
So
Yeah.
you just have to have that understanding. That's the only piece that changes on the buying side. Seller side, they know they have to consider, paying compensation. I feel like the biggest difference is that you don't have to say agree ahead of time, hey, I'm paying X amount, because in an offer, maybe B is better than Y. You know what I mean? Like whatever amount is. So that's the difference on the seller side. But in the end, they always paid for it, and they're probably still going to continue to pay for it if they're willing to. It's just that it's no preset, predetermined amount, unless that's the agreement they have with the agent.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for all that clarification today.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for bringing the questions. I think there are great questions, and I know some of them are coming straight from our consumer database. So hopefully that answered a lot of questions for the people, that are.
I know it did for me.
I know, right? Yeah. So That's good. I think this is it for today, and I am looking forward to seeing all of you in our next episode. So please, if you like our content, follow us, subscribe, like, and
Share.
all those things. I don't know where you guys are watching from, but if you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Instagram, follow us, and we're going to be bringing more content like this to you guys. And if you have any ideas for new content too, feel free to message us. We have our numbers going on the screen here, and we'll be happy to bring up any interest content that you guys are interested to hear from. Alrighty. Thank you, Carlos. And thank you, everyone watching. I'll see ya.
Take care.